episode of Witty CFB here. Rob Sheply. We got special guest Dan Sheply joining us. We are previewing Ole Miss versus Georgia. Second year in a row we're doing it. Dan, it's great to have you on. I mean, obviously, Ole Miss is looking really strong this year. 6-0 right now, 3-0 in conference play. Chambliss has just been quite frankly, a revelation considering that Austin Simmons goes to start this year. They've been taking care of business, all things considered. Dan, how do you feel about Ole Miss right now in this matchup?
Yeah, the vibes going into it are great. Going into the season, I did have high expectations for Austin Simmons. He got hurt? Kentucky game did not look good there, admittedly. And Trinidad comes in. Who would have thought? D2 last year, D3. Lane calls him. He comes over and lights up the world. The LSU game was awesome. He's never had a big game like that, be it at home, but just to have the backup come in and lead the offense and not even lose a step, even gaining one, if you look at it like that, it's been really exciting to watch Trinidad, and I'm hoping he can continue his success.
Yeah, because even when, I sit down and kind of look at the stats that Ole Miss has kind of compiled this year, I mean, Ole Miss ranks number one in the country at creating offensive plays over 30 yards this year. They're top 20 in terms of adjusted EPA, in terms of points per play, yards per play, pass success rate. But, I think the one thing that I think we can kind of objectively say that they've been struggling with is Ole Miss right now, they rank 117th in terms of defensive rush success allowed. So you definitely have to kind of think to yourself, is that something that Georgia is probably going to try to pounce on and try to definitely take advantage of that. And probably most importantly, too, to some degree, try to make the Rebels just more of a one-dimensional kind of team, because I think we can both agree, too, that Kawan Lacey's also been a really, really great addition and just a really strong player for him this year, too.
Yeah, that's one of my keys to the game is because Georgia now, they're not used to having a mobile quarterback like Gunner. So then that just adds such a hard factor too with how good their offensive line is consistently with run blocking. You have Zach Frazier getting 15 plus carries a game. And even when Gunner can pull it out on a read option and go 20, 15 yards like that, they don't use the quarterback as much, but it's definitely something they should look after. And I'm banking on Pete Golden to have more of a game plan to stop the run as opposed to the pass compared to recent opponents who are more pass heavy.
Yeah, because I guess the one thing that you have to give, Georgia credit for is, I've said this even at the beginning of the season that, they decided not to go after a transfer quarterback. They really believed in Gunnar Stockton, and rightfully so. I mean, he has 12 touchdowns on the year to, I think, only 1 or 2 interceptions, roughly 1,600 yards. So, I mean, he's taken care of the ball and done his thing. But, I think another thing for Ole Miss that's probably worth pointing out is, Georgia's only had 1 sack from a defensive end or an actual defensive tackle this year. So that to me just seems like uncharacteristic of Georgia more or less too. But how Ole Miss can definitely take advantage of that if that protection holds up.
Yeah, it's one of the main things watching Georgia this year is expecting their defense has been consistent to a point, but the pass rush, and that's where their front four, that's where you mainly expect them to be top notch, and they've been nowhere near that. But also Kirby knows that too, so I'm sure he's getting some cooked up for them. It's going to be a great matchup because the Ole Miss O line has improved a lot in my opinion over the course of this year, and Georgia's D line has something to prove this game, so it should be a great matchup for the offense and defensive line.
Yeah, because even when I go back and, I think of the Georgia games that I watched beginning of the year, I think of the Tennessee game, I think of the Alabama game, and then I think of the Auburn game a couple weeks ago. And what all those games have in common is just how slow Georgia started offensively. And I kind of sit there and say to myself, if Ole Miss can get off to a really hot start and get off to a 14 or 21 point lead, if I would find it really difficult that Georgia can come back in this game, but at the same time, too, it's just really hard to doubt a Kirby Smart coach team.
Yeah, that's a great point there. Getting off to a hot start is going to be humongous there because last year we were at home with that crowd advantage. But Athens is going to be rocking on Saturday at 3:30. So it depends on Lane. I think he's usually pretty aggressive, so I think he would want to get the ball first and try to set the tone like that. But I think Georgia's gonna be fired up too. So
Yeah, I mean, if you're Lane Kiffin, like, what do you think are going to be some ways that you expect Ole Miss to exploit Georgia defensively?
yeah, ways that I expect is for offense to run the ball, includes Trinidad, because Keywan Lacey from Missouri, a transfer, has been a beast for us. Having a guy who can carry the rock like 20 times a game for Lane Kiffin's offense is so important after watching for multiple years, because you don't think they run as ineffective in a pass happy offense, but they run a lot more than you think. And when they do, it sets up so much passing deep downfield. So I think getting Keywan Lacey and Trinidad going is going to be huge. And testing out our defense, because I think our defense has been improved to an extent. We were talking about their rush yards allowed, but Pete Golden has the players knowing their role, and the front four, Xavier Harris and William Eccles, have leading our team in sacks. So it's going to be those are my keys for the game: defense and Trinidad and Keywan being able to. We have to be able to run the ball, especially at Georgia. It would be a great way to get the crowd out of it, and then set up explosive plays downfield.
Yeah, because especially too, like, even when I go back and think of Georgia, even last year, and probably less of a degree this year, but there's some component to it. Is I don't think Gunnar Stockton's, particularly Georgia's receivers, have really helped him a bunch this year. I'm not saying that they're bums or anything, but I think we can. I think to some degree we think we should be expecting a little bit more out of this Georgia offense, particularly them, passing the ball too, because Nate Frazier, obviously, he had some health concerns last year, fully healthy, and he's kind of getting in there too. And the pass protection is definitely better than what it was last season. But I think if you're Georgia too, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we see Georgia maybe trying to be a little bit more creative in terms of trying to catch this Ole Miss secondary off guard, especially in the beginning of the game.
Yeah, say returning, they have Oscar Delp, who was supposed to be a huge factor in our offense, and he's been good. But for his talent, he should be getting the ball a lot more. And they brought in a huge acquisition, in my opinion, in the transfer portal, in Zachariah Branch, who at USC was more of a gadget guy, kind of special teams, but I think he's an incredible athlete. And I just think if they can find a way to just get him the ball in space, then he can explode onto the scene this year.
Yeah, and even one of the other last things I'll kind of mention in terms of this game. I mean, we definitely talked about Georgia's lack of a pass rush. We've talked about the explosiveness of Ole Miss's offense. But I think another thing that's kind of worth mentioning about this game is Georgia's inability to be able to extend drives on third down. But also, I think Ole Miss also struggling in the red zone. When I've thought about Ole Miss, I was thinking a lot about the Washington State game last week. There was a drive at the very beginning of the game where they decided to go for it, and Washington State stuffed them. And then vice versa, when I look at this Georgia team, Georgia ranks 86th in the country in terms of third down conversion rate. So it's like you sit there and you kind of think to yourself, I think this game also probably to some degree is going to come down to, whose defense is going to be on the field more, because I think it's going to be one of those games where, yeah, I'm sure Ole Miss is going to get a successful player or two, but it's really going to come down to, at least for me, also who's going to control time of possession.
Yeah, that's what the third down and fourth down is a great point, because I'm cautiously optimistic about that, because with big games with Lane Kiffin, it can be 4th and 5, 4th and 6, and you'll push it knowing it's a big game. But there's also times where you should be settling and taking the points when you have to trust in your defense at certain points. And Georgia, I feel like they're usually one of the more consistent teams on third down, so that's pretty uncharacteristic of them to not be able to pick up first downs consistently. But with the way their offense has been, I can see why it's been like that so far.
Yeah, because we'll talk a little. I'll ask for a prediction in a second, but I think the one thing that you have to be at least excited about if you're an Ole Miss fan is, Ole Miss has never been an SEC championship game, and so for them to kind of be in this position and be able to kind of choose their own destiny, it definitely is pretty exciting, because when you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, yeah, you have to go on the road versus Oklahoma, and we don't know about John McCear's status. Then you go versus South Carolina, then you play the Citadel, then you play Florida. and then the Egg Bowl. So I mean, there's definitely a real opportunity here. Those opponents, there's a real SEC championship game or not, be in there for the college football playoff, especially when you think about last year and that game versus Kentucky was ultimately the catalyst to what cost them in the position that they were in last year.
Yeah, this is a super exciting position to be in because that Kentucky game was so early in the year that I kind of just put a damper on the rest of it. So winning that Georgia game last year was exciting, but also at the same time, we knew that we still would need more, knowing that we lost to Kentucky. So that's why this game we were undefeated, so we don't have as much to lose technically. But winning at Georgia would, I think, solidify a great chance for us to make the playoff. But for Georgia, them losing again would make I think they would still be able to make it. That would be 2 great losses, assuming they don't lose by a lot. But I think Georgia is going to has a lot more to gain from this game.
Yeah, I agree too. Because even if let's say even if Ole Miss lost by let's just say they lost by 14, I don't think it's really the end of the world because Georgia, no matter what, is always going to be just a great program under Kirby Smart. So you don't have to sit there and say, oh man, they lost that game. But maybe if they lost next week or something, that's a different conversation. But for now, I mean, Ole Miss controls their destiny. They have a lot of things going for them, and most importantly, everything is just clicking for them.
Yeah, this is such an exciting matchup just because usually Ole Miss is in the position Georgia's in where they already have a loss by now and Georgia's undefeated, like top 5. So it's pretty cool to see it flip for this year, but also it's going to be a great game. I'm excited. Can't beat a Saturday in Athens, 3:30, college game day.
Absolutely. College game day is going to be there. And Dan, the last thing I'm going to ask you is what's your score prediction for this game?
Score prediction, I'm going to go Ole Miss 27, Georgia 24. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be 27-24. I don't want it's one of those games that's really hard for me to decide. I think Ole Miss I'm going to say Ole Miss is going to pull it out right now. That's subject to change, but if I had to decide today, my gut tells me that Ole Miss is going to figure out a way to win. And I think for me, this really we kind of talked about how last year was quote unquote their season, but Ole Miss has showed a lot of resiliency, and I think they can pull off this win and pull off the upset.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see how both teams come out because Lane's going to have the boys excited, and I know Kirby's going to be just the same. So